In this lesson, we'll be discussing square roots. By the end of the lesson, you should be able to identify perfect squares and find the square root of numbers. So, the difference between squared and square root. So squared means that it's a number multiplied by itself. So when it says 3 to the power of 2, that means 3 times 3, which equals 9. The square root is the opposite of squared. So the square root of 9 is equal to 3. The square root symbol is called a radical sign. So how many roots does a number have? Well, a positive number always has 2. So for example, the square root of 64 has this negative and positive. That's positive and negative. Square root of 64, that would be positive and negative 8. Because 8 times 8 is 64, and negative 8 times negative 8 is also 64. Fractions have 2 as well. So the square root of plus or minus the square root of 1/4 is equal to, see how they broke it up? And so the square root of 1 over the square root of 4. Well, the square root of 1 is 1, because 1 times 1 is 1. The square root of 4 is 2, because 2 times 2 is 4. So my answer is plus or minus the square root of 1/2. Negative numbers under the radical has no roots because it's not even real. There's no number that multiplied by itself gets us negative 36. And if we have a radical with a negative in front of it, just the negative, not like up here where you have plus or minus, it's just the negative. So the negative square root of 25 is negative 5. It's kind of like this is there's an invisible 1 there, so what this really says is negative 1 times the square root of 25, and the square root of 25 is 5. Negative 1 times 5 is negative 5. So a perfect square is a number that has an integer as its square root. So for example, plus or minus the square root of 16 is plus or minus 4. So the square root of 16 is a perfect square. It doesn't mean that we can't find the square root of a non-perfect square. So we can find the square root of 15. It's just irrational. So the square root of 15 is plus or minus 3.8729833 ... So we can find the square root of a non-perfect square. It's just not rational. So find the square root of each number. So notice in the first one it says plus or minus the square root of 64. So my answer has to be plus or minus 8. Notice in this next one it says negative on the outside. So remember that's almost like it's a negative 1 times the square root of 36. So negative 1, square root of 36 is 6. So negative 1 times 6 is negative 6. If it doesn't have the plus or minus out here, it's invisible, but your answer doesn't have to have the plus or minus in it. So in this one, we're going to take the square root of 9, which is 3, over the square root of 16, which is 4, and then get our answer of 3/4. Evaluate the expression. Evaluate just means find the answer. So the first thing I have to do, because we're following our order of operations, and underneath the radical is a grouping symbol. Okay, so our parentheses, it's sort of like the parentheses. So we have to do this first. So 6 plus 30, that's 36. Then in our order of operations, it's our exponent, so our square root. So square root of 36 is 6. So 6 plus 4 is 10. All right, again, first thing I'm going to do is what's underneath the radical. So 20 minus 4 is 16. The square root of 16 is 4. Again, following our order of operations, we multiply. So this says negative 1 times this number right here under the radical. So negative square root of 16. So that would be negative 4 plus 1 is negative 3. Okay, next one. 3 times 3, we're doing what's under the radical first. 3 times 3 is 9, plus 7 is 16, and the square root of 16 is 4, and since we have this plus or minus in front of it, we need to carry that over and put plus or minus 4. All right, let's try a few more. So, the negative square root of 81. Negative's on the outside, so that's good. Square root of 81 is 9, so that would be negative 9. Uh-oh, same one. Okay, square root of 1 over 16. Square root of 1 is 1. Square root of 16 is 4, so it would be 1/4. Oh my goodness. There we go. All right, so let's do what's inside first. Square root of 49, which is 7, and then 2 times 7 would be 14. All right, so what's the opposite of squared? Square root. How many roots does a positive number have? It has 2. There we go. 1 positive, 1 negative.